So in my current presentation, I will be speaking about the work of Michael Witzel. He is the Wales Professor of Sanskrit at the Department of Sanskrit and Indian Studies at the Harvard University. He is in fact only the fourth person to hold this chair since it was instituted in 1903. So now Witzel is a very important Indologist whose work has spanned decades, and he's been the editor of very important series, including the Law of Code of Vishnu and so on. His repertoire has included him being the editor of some very important series as well. And the Aryan invasion / migration issue has been one of his major theories. So I will be presenting some of his main points and refuting the same with archaeological and linguistic evidence. Witzel has also written a lot on Vedic Hinduism, so I will be considering some of his main points from there. Then, of course, there is this notorious petition he was a part of, where he prevented a few Hindu origin and Hindu Americans from taking control of the narrative that was printed about Hinduism in the grade 6th textbooks of the California public schools. So I discuss some of that as well, and then present my conclusions. So if we look at the main model of Witzel for his Aryan invasion / migration, what he essentially believes is that a group of pastoral tribes from the steppes, who were already a part of an Aryan civilization, rode through the mountainous terrains of places like Iran, Afghanistan, and present-day northern India on horse chariots and arrived to terrorize the local population who then existed. Throughout this journey, apparently, they must have mixed with the local population and became racially intermingled over a few generations and finally reached modern North India. Perhaps one can think of with such huge collective amnesia that they seem not to have left a single trace of this entire arduous journey. Despite thundering through the journey, and thundering is a word Witzel uses, and having established themselves in the new place, they seem to have settled into the river-fed plains of the Indus Valley civilization and have neither named the new places nor the rivers nor left any geographical markers of the supposed homeland from which they have come. And then, in fact, he says that this entire process is based on intermingling of several orders and so much theorizations and convolution involved that even refuting any part of this becomes very difficult. And hence, this is a very convenient model which has existed now for several decades. There have been several comprehensive rebuttals to Witzel's theory, including those by Vishal Agarwal, Kazanas, and S. Kalyanaraman. Now, Witzel's main model, it shares some of the features with others, including that of Romila Thapar, whose work was presented before lunch. And their main contention is that Sanskrit and Rigveda are not purely Indian in origin or as an IP. And that the ancestors of Bharata were invaders who migrated from outside, and hence an involute basis is laid for any future invasions and those becoming a part of the Bharatiya identity. There is, of course, also the relegation of Sanskrit sources, commentaries, and historical records of the traditional corpus. These have been relegated to secondary or sometimes even non-existent sources, so that only and primacy has been accorded to that such as Iranian or Greek records, even when the quality of that evidence has been much more poor. And thus the Indian sources have been subject to a standard of quality control which has not been given to that of non-Indian sources. To understand more in detail about the states and what is involved, I would refer to the other paper. Now I consider particulars from Witzel's work. So if we consider even in 2019, so this is not some very old work, but even in 2019, when Witzel is writing in Beyond the Flight of the Falcon, he says, considering the term Uparisyena, Uparisyena actually in Sanskrit means beyond the scope of eagle, and that is actually the designation of the Hindu Kush mountains. Witzel uses something as innocuous as this word to read an arrow of direction of supposed migrants into India. No further explanation is offered, just this word. This is how he operates. Further, if we consider the archaeological evidence which is there, Witzel admits that the term Aryan is neither a racial one nor a linguistic one. This is important to realize because there is no such term as Aryan or Dravidian in the way that we use today in any of our traditional corpus. What he fails to mention, though, is that there is a whole colonial project behind these two terms, and this has been documented and studied by several people. He also, of course, even in 2019, he cherry picks his data and omits the archaeological research, for instance, on the Saraswati paleo channels, right? And what this impact has on the entire theory or even on the chronology of ancient India. Witzel gives 1300 BC as the period of the Rig Veda, when in fact 1900 BCE would be the terminus antiquum for the Mahabharata itself. So Rig Veda being prior to that is not possible to be attributed to 1300. So even in 2019, Witzel continues to ignore these hard evidences which have come from sciences such as hydrology, geology, geomorphology, and continues to peddle the previous migration/invasion theories. For more details on these two, on the chronology of these, I would refer to my previous papers. The next contentious issues, and in fact one which has been flawed to death, if one can say, is that of the horse. Now, the main contention in this AI/M theory is that the domesticated horse, as we know, and the Indo-European language were introduced into India in the Indus Valley Civilization area by those who invaded and migrated from the supposed steppes. Now, this argument of the introduction of the horse is in fact crucial to Witzel's decades-old work, and for others similar to Witzel, including Romila Thapa, because as Laurie Patton says in the Indo-Aryan controversy, if the horse is ever discovered to be contemporaneous with the Indus Valley culture or the pre-Vedic South Asian civilization, the migrationist theories would have to change dramatically. So despite knowing this, even in 2019, you have all these faunal remains which have been discovered. You have Mr. J.P. Joshi's of the Harappan site. He has discovered that. And when the findings of the Indian archaeologists were not trusted at the international platforms, they were further examined by the Hungarian archaeologist, Sandor Botoni, who confirmed that the remains that were discovered at the Harappan sites were that of the true horse itself. So this is not something which was in fact brought in as believed. We also have Sanjay Manjul's 2018 excavations at Sanauli, which have shown that chariots were unearthed dating to 2100 to 1900 BCE itself. So you have all of this in 2018, but you have Witzel continuing to peddle old theories and in fact even refusing to acknowledge that this wealth of evidence exists. Despite all this evidence that the proto-chariots were already there, Witzel believes them to have been imported into India by 2nd millennium BC. So this is the main section which concerned the archaeological evidence. Then there is the linguistic evidence and Witzel's refusal to engage with the domain's latest evidence. Now, we are aware of comparative linguistics, and I'm not going to go deep into that. Comparative linguistics is when you consider the relationships and correspondences between two or more languages with the intention of trying to find a common ancestral language, right? So for instance, in the Indo-European case, they come up with the construct of the Indo-European because they believe it has to be a Proto-Indo-European, which was brought into into the present day Bharata territory from outsiders. So there is the hunt for this PIE. Now, this comparative linguistics in today's age has been shown to be a highly problematic field which is riddled with circularity and a lot of fallacies. There are previous papers of mine to which one can refer for the details. But Witzel, on the other hand, believes that even though this is not a hard science, he accords primacy to the associations that one comes up with from comparative linguistics more than that over any hard sciences like archaeology. So Witzel continues to believe that speakers of a Proto-Indo-Iranian language, right, who lived apparently in the steppes or in Russia, they are the ones who finally came into present-day India and left behind loan words in their trail. Now, another question which we need to remember is, even if one were to admit or consider that yes, there may have been some loan words, the question always comes down to, why should the arrow of direction always be into India? Why can't it be the other way? There is no such consideration as well. Now, in order to think that there should be some loan words and there should have been this linguistic evidence which can be considered as the basis, Witzel in fact studies a few of these, and the sad reality is that there is no such evidence. And when you have no evidence, the natural thing to do is to admit that the thesis itself with which you began is to be questioned. Instead, what Witzel does is that he sets aside that and continues to believe that it was the Iranians who simply changed some of their names in their local areas, and it is they who must have brought the same even into India. So he's refusing to even admit the evidence. Witzel also uses certain other vague material to believe that they are evidence. For instance, the Agnihotra ritual. Now, this Witzel introduces this as a sun spell and something which was done by the Iranians first, which is not really true. I mean, all cultures have elements of worship in the natural elements, but there is no one-on-one mapping between even the two of them. So Witzel does not admit that. Now, when he has not been able to find any evidences to back his theory, what Witzel has instead done is he has, in some cases, even invented the evidence. So this is a situation where Witzel mistranslated a verse from the Baudhayana Shrauta Sutra to make it appear that there was indeed a migration. So he has actually mistranslated a verse. When this was pointed out to him, and by other senior scholars, including Konrad Elst, who pointed out that the manner in which Witzel had split the term to indicate that there was a migration was not actually the way in which it had to be done, he refused to acknowledge that. In fact, he went ahead to the point of saying that this is one of the few places where Elst may have been right. So there's a condescension. Instead of admitting that he has mistranslated it, he has just said, okay, this is one of the strange occurrences when somebody else may have been right, and he continues to believe the same thing. Apart from this section, Witzel has also worked on a lot of texts, translating very important Sanskrit texts into English under his editorship. And in the process, he has written extensively on Vedic Hinduism. I am considering in my book particularly a few words. The one especially where he's written with Stephanie Jameson. Witzel and Jameson both date the Vedic period to 1500 to 500 BCE. And then again, the reason they have chosen this range is because their lower limit is directed by Beshart's influential work on dating the Gautama Buddha. Now, why is this problematic? Why is dating Buddha problematic? Is an entire chronological enterprise by the British as a very important colonial project. So, which is beyond the scope of this theory, but the paper referred here has them. Further, Witzel, similar to Romila Thapar that we saw in the previous section, uses Vedic Hinduism as something which is very apparently different from what we call as Hinduism today. So they try to create these differences. They admit that there are, of course, many surprising continuities, but they do not want to look at any picture which shows an unbroken lineage or an unbroken tradition over the past 5,000 plus years. Witzel also believes that the Rig Veda, or at least the parts of it, may have been composed in the Avestan region. So again, this is what I was referring to earlier when I said the states involved with some of these theorizations is that the central corpus of the Hindu texts are not indigenous to us. That is one of the important consequences which comes out. Witzel also says that the approach of scholars and our gurus such as Adi Shankaracharya's on interpretation of the Upanishads was wrong from the point of view of the development of the Indian thought. And when pushed and challenged, he offers actually no explanation. His response is to not even consider the pushback which he has received. Witzel also makes a comparison between several practices which are core to Hindu texts, as I mentioned earlier, like for instance the Agnihotra ritual. And he tries to draw parallels between them and Iranian words. while always using the Iranian words as the standards to which, even though they are actually a lot more poorly described and poorly retained, they are apparently the originals, and what we have in India being something that is inherited. Another important feature of Witzel, which I'm sure even Bakshiji may touch upon, is the manner in which he rebuts or responds to those who challenge his work. For instance, V. Swaminathan, when he called out some of the translations and words of Witzel against Panini and Sayanacharya, was he was responded with extremely rude and abusive language, but nothing basic was considered. I will now come to the next section, which is Witzel's petition. The California public schools in the grade 6, they use different textbooks from different publishers, and Hindu origin parents as well as Americans with Hindu background noticed that their children were learning the following as some of the main texts of Hinduism which were being taught. That is, the Vedas describe Aryan victories during their invasion of India, which is factually incorrect. Then you have page 169 of the Holt Basic Reading Series, which claims that the Ramayana was written later than Mahabharata, which is again false. Then you have another book by the Hartrott School publishers, which claims that Hindi is written with the Arabic alphabet using 18 letters, when it's actually written with Devanagari. Similarly, they had other statements that the monkey-trained Hanuman loved Rama so much that it is said that he is present every time when Ramayana is told. So look around, do you see any monkeys? These were the kind of things which were being taught to grade 6 students in the California public schools. So you had the parents protest, and they applied to have some of this basic errors, factual inconsistencies to be corrected, and they challenged the system. And what should have been a matter purely between Indian Americans and Hindus whose heritage was at stake, and the California board, and the interaction between the two, instead you have Witzel, who thundered into this picture along with other scholars, and said that these changes should not be implemented. That is, corrections should not be carried out. So he led a group of 150 scholars. He says scholars, but in fact some of them were people who were specializing in road transportation, and they had nothing to do with Hinduism or with the scholarly aspects of it. All of these people challenged the changing of the texts. Then you had the meeting in which CSB asked both the sides to present their matter, and this entire episode, I've given the details over here. So Witzel believed that murtis of Hindu gods should still be called statues. He objected to them being called even murtis. He said that when called out that Ramayana cannot be shown to have occurred later than Mahabharata, he goes on to say who in the 6th grade should care about these things. So he doesn't want any of the changes to be carried out. So I have documented this episode as well in the paper, and in the interest of time, I will now summarize the main points. So Witzel's work, many people have called out some of the inaccuracies and have provided very systematic rebuttals to him. In fact, there's one excellent one by Bhagwan Singh, who is the author of the Vedic Harappans, who has shown in how little Witzel actually knows about the material he claims expertise in. I think future work in studying Witzel's material should involve using Sanskrit non-translatable lens. And this is in fact something which should be used for the whole range of scholars, including Romila Thapar and so on, to see how, if one uses the lens of S&T, how all of their translations, how all of their interpretations would be absolutely wrong. So that is something which can be done further. Witzel's work also is there in mythology, which has very racist overtones, and that also needs to be studied.